This is a special Commitment 2018 presentation. The Democratic primary debate for Congressional District 2. Broadcasting live from across the entire state of Maine. Here's your host, Megan Torgerson.
Good evening and welcome to the Democratic debate in the race for Maine's 2nd Congressional District. This debate is part of our Commitment 2018 coverage here at WMTW News 8. I'm Megan Torgerson. Happy to be here this evening. We are broadcasting from UMaine Augusta, and we are live statewide thanks to our partnerships with WABI TV5 in Bangor and WAGM in Presque Isle. We are going to ask that the audience please hold your applause. We're going to introduce our candidates sitting to my left, seeking to challenge incumbent Congressman Bruce Poliquin this November. In alphabetical order, our candidates are State Representative and Marine veteran Jared Golden, businessman Craig Olson, and conservationist and philanthropist Lucas St. Clair. Our questions come from all over the state. They're going to be asked by the editorial panel to my right. First, you will have WMTW News 8 political reporter Paul Merrill asking some questions. WABI TV5 assistant news director John Small, and WAGM reporter Isaac Lucan. So here are some of the rules. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer. You'll also have 1 minute to do your opening statements. You will see the traffic light turn yellow when you have 15 seconds left. When it's red, stop talking. Time is up. We went over this before, but do not wait for the green light to start talking. Once you start talking, our timer will hit the button and do that. We will begin by letting each of the candidates make a 1 minute opening statement. Again, we're going to start in alphabetical order. That means Jared Golden, you start off.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. So the first 17 years of this century have been tough for America, and we've seen the economy of the 90s and a balanced budget crumble under the weight of tax cuts for the rich and multinational corporations, 2 Middle East wars still ongoing, and an economic crash that was caused by Wall Street and irresponsible leadership. I don't think we should be looking to the failed policies that got us here, but that's what Congress is doing today. We need change, and we need to focus on the working middle class. I think we need to demand a fair share of the profits of our own labor, higher wages, affordable health care, and real retirement benefits that work. But we can't do any of this unless we get big money out of politics and put people before special interests. Those are my priorities right there. 1, get the money out of politics. 2, higher wages and real health care and retirement benefits for working middle class people and people of Maine. And most importantly, putting you first, not the party and not the politics. Thank you very much.
Mr. Olson.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you for all the viewers who have tuned in and took time away from what I know are very busy lives. What struck me as I travel around Maine's 2nd District is that your story in the 2nd District is really my story. And really, for me, that's something that resonates in all of the times that I've traveled throughout this community. You know, I'm the average voter in Maine's 2nd Congressional District. I've raised a family in this district, I've built a business in this district, and my children have been educated in the public schools of this district. And our family has struggled in this district for both financial and with healthcare issues. Bruce Poliquin has done none of these things. And so the 2nd District really deserves a member of Congress who has broad life experience, who has empathy, who puts in 5 days a week in Washington working for Mainers on issues like affordable health care, jobs, climate change, and a living minimum wage. And I really believe that that's how we will move forward, and I will be serving as your next congressman in Washington.
Mr. St. Clair.
Thank you so much for all of you to come out tonight, and thank you for hosting this event. I decided to run for Congress when Bruce Poliquin took away health care, or attempted to take away health care, for over 100,000 Mainers and for millions of people across this country. Now, I believe in the power of big ideas, and I have a plan to fix the problems that Congressman Poliquin has created. A plan to make sure that everyone can see a doctor when they're sick. A plan to protect Social Security and our natural resources, and to make the investments in our state and our people that are so desperately needed. When I started working on Katahdin Woods and Waters in the Katahdin region, people told me that it was going to be impossible, that the opposition was going to be too tough to overcome, and that we that the opposition was going to be too hard to overcome, and that we needed to try a different track. But so I started bringing people together, focusing on having tough conversations, and ultimately we were able to succeed over the opposition of Bruce Poliquin, Paul LePage, and Donald Trump. And I continue to work hard like that to make sure that we have progress for the people in the 2nd District.
Your time is up. Sorry, Mr. St. Clair. We're going to move on. I'm going to introduce John Small, who is going to introduce our first question.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you to all the candidates for appearing here tonight. We appreciate it. Our first question is coming from one of our viewers in the county. It's from Jason Parent in Caribou.
Aroostook County and Maine's other rural rim counties have faced significant economic development and population decline challenges. What specific strategies would you propose to encourage growth and development in rural Maine?
Mr. Olson, you start.
Rural Maine, it's interesting because that permeates the entire state, I say, the entire 2nd District. It's really about getting more people to these rural areas, not only through bringing people from other states, but also recent immigrants to the U.S. And I think one of the big keys is rural broadband and having access to high-speed internet throughout the state, so people can work from away, they can begin businesses, and they can also start new and creative ventures within those communities.
Yeah, I agree with Craig. I mean, it's clear that we have the slowest broadband speeds in the country. If we could fix that, it would create the ability for people to work remotely and work from the remote communities around Maine and Aroostook County and Washington County. Healthcare obviously is a huge issue. If we could make healthcare affordable so people can stay in the communities that they live and have access to rural healthcare, rural hospitals, making the investments in our schools and our hospitals. No one's going to be attracted to rural communities in Maine if we don't have those very important bedrock foundational attractions, and schools and hospitals are absolutely part of it. We also need to make investments in the Small Business Administration and making sure that we're investing in our small businesses, because that really is what the 2nd District of Maine is made up of. Lots of small businesses and hardworking people, and if we invest in them, we can succeed.
Thank you. One idea that I've been contemplating on is trying to get some federal investment into our University of Maine system, trying to turn the University of Maine into the premier research center in the country, really, for development of a 21st century natural resources based economy. I think about the Composite Research Center at the University of Maine Orono, where they're doing good work to try and move forward with new forest products, studying our marine resources, things like offshore wind and tidal power. Researching how we can do farming better in a new century where I think we're moving in the direction of smaller farms, and also investing in renewable energy. So research and development, I'd like Maine to be the center of that when it comes to natural resources. And then I think government needs to make investments in things that small businesses can afford. So infrastructure, roads, bridges, high-speed freight rail, investing in our ports, and yes, absolutely, we need to invest in high-speed internet.
Thank you. Thank all of you. We're going to turn to Paul, who has our next question.
Candidates, our next question has to do with immigration. As I'm sure you know, the American Civil Liberties Union of Maine is currently fighting a legal battle following reports of Customs and Borders Protection agents questioning passengers on buses in Maine. Federal immigration officials say they have the authority to look for aliens within 100 miles of any border or coast, and you can see that encompasses the entire state of Maine, pretty much all of New England as well. The question is, do you think random citizenship checks are a violation of someone's civil rights? Why or why not? Start with Lucas.
Thanks, Paul. I do think they are. I mean, we need to find ways to embrace people that are wanting to come to our country. We have a workforce that in the next decade, a third of the people in our workforce will be retiring or becoming of retirement age. And so we need to make sure that we are creating an attractive environment for people to come here, whether they're coming from Canada, Mexico, or anywhere else around the country. And it is a violation of people's basic civil liberties if we're boarding buses and checking for identification. That is not the kind of country that we are, and that's not the kind of country that I think we should become.
I think we should be really careful about protecting American civil liberties, and I think sometimes checks without any real probable cause can really be dangerous in that regard. You can really infringe upon people's privacy and their rights as American citizens. So I would say, in general, no, we should avoid that, and unless there's been some kind of violation or some kind of law broken, then we should avoid having law enforcement question people's citizenship, because it can really infringe upon Americans' rights.
I believe that too. It's a very poor use of time of our law enforcement officials, border people, because, you know, unless there's a credible threat, unless there's some reason of probable cause that there is something going on with a specific bus or a specific vehicle, and it can be traced back for some reason. I mean, these things being just random, we don't need that in this society. We're a country built on immigrants, and when we begin to be less and less welcoming, we're going to be creating even more problems than we already have.
Paul, I believe you have a follow-up.
Yeah, a quick follow-up. Also on the topic of immigration, Jared, you'll start this one. Pretty much a yes or no question. Around the country, some municipalities have decided their local law enforcement will not ask about citizenship status, no matter what. The term sanctuary cities. Do you support the idea of sanctuary cities, yes or no?
I think, again, it's about civil liberties. So if there's been no violation of law, then I don't think law enforcement should be infringing on people like that.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Okay, next we are going to turn to Isaac. You have a question for the candidates about the environment?
Yes. And actually asking the question is Susan Gaddy of Portland, and here's her question for you guys.
What are they going to be doing to protect regulations from being rolled back to protect the environment?
Jared, I believe you start.
You want me to start with that? All right. Well, I think the question is about protecting environmental regulations and preventing them from being rolled back. I think that's why many people believe that Democrats need to win a majority so that we're in a position to try and push back against those things. I think that a lot of advocacy groups and organizations can bring suits against some of these changes and try and protect them in the courts. And at the end of the day, having a Congress that's going to make the investment in the EPA, making sure that they're fully staffed, well-resourced, and able to enforce those regulations that we have in place is critically important.
I really think we need to be putting more funding into science and having that body of science being a credible thing for us to base our decisions on. I also think that we need to strengthen the Environmental Protection Agency and not make it, as it seems to be now, as the Environmental Deregulation Agency, but something that's actually out there regulating and protecting the environment with hard science and with some teeth, because I think that anytime somebody can push that envelope of making a little bit more money by being lax with environmental regulations, they probably are going to try and do it.
Yeah, I also agree. The environment and our natural resources are Maine's fundamental advantage. We have some of the largest intact forests, beautiful rivers, coastline, agricultural land. Keeping those intact is the advantage that we have as a state. And we also have a legacy as a state of sending lawmakers to Washington, D.C. to stand up for these tremendous natural resources. Ed Muskie and George Mitchell, what they did with the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, those things are incredibly important for the air we breathe, for the water that we drink. So if we're not protecting those things, we're failing our state and we're failing our people. So it's absolutely important that we continue to push for environmental regulations and the conservation that our country so needs.
We are going to shift gears a little bit. We have individual questions for some of the candidates. John, I believe you are going to start off with the individual questions, and you have a question for Jared.
Yes, first question for Representative Golden. In your first campaign ad, you say, and I quote, "As a Democratic leader, I didn't let LePage stop us from expanding health care for 70,000 Mainers," unquote. The governor, as you know, has vetoed every Medicaid expansion bill the legislature passed, and his administration is still delaying the implementation of the Medicaid expansion law that voters approved in November. Does your ad claim victory for a battle that is actually still being fought?
No, I don't think so at all. Actually, I think recent developments actually prove that the battle has been won. So I stand by that at 100%. I voted for Medicaid expansion. We have pushed that issue and kept it on the front burner as a very important issue for 70 to 80,000 people in this state. Never gave up. Went out on a campaign trail in my second campaign, really helping to push Medicaid expansion and keeping this front and center in voters' minds, making sure everyone knew how important it was. I was the first Democratic leader in this state, I think last December, to say this is the law of the land, voters have approved it, and if the governor doesn't move forward, he's going to get sued, and he will lose. And that's what the court settled just this past week. The courts have told him to move forward because it's the law, and he's going to have to do that, and we've won that fight, and we're going to expand health care to 70 or 80,000 people in this state, and I'm awfully proud of it.
Paul.
Next individual question, Lucas St. Clair, also about an ad, not yours specifically. For weeks, Mainers have been seeing issue ads running, talking about your push to successfully secure national monument status for land in the Katahdin region that your family donated. Federal law prohibits your campaign from coordinating with outside groups, but the person who runs the organization behind the issue ads was the best man at your wedding. This has come up before, but we want to ask you in this setting, what do you say to voters who say this doesn't quite pass the straight face test?
Sure. I learned about the Maine Outdoor Alliance the same time everyone else did, when the Bangor Daily News reported on it. I've asked them to take down their ads, and I've called for them to disclose their donors. And our campaign finance system is broken, no matter who benefits from it. And I've supported and I would support the repeal of the Citizens United, and I support the Disclose Act. But I've made a decision to run a positive campaign and not to tear down other Democrats. And the issue that I'm most concerned with now is the fact that I'm being attacked by another Democrat in a political ad. I think what we need to do is keep politics positive, and we need to focus on the issues that are going to make people's lives better in Maine.
Is that you talking about an ad coming from one of your opponents?
Yes.
I'm assuming.
I'll happily take that.
Go ahead.
As you saw the mailer that was just up on the screen there, it actually came to my house today. And this is an organization that says, with a straight face, that this is an issue ad, that it has nothing to do with the Lucas St. Clair campaign. Front and center, right up at the very top, it says Lucas St. Clair. That's the third district-wide mailer that's been set in about a week, on top of hundreds of thousands of dollars of TV ads. I don't think that it is an honest approach the organization has taken. At the end of the day, getting money out of politics is far too important not to talk about it. I'm going to continue to talk about it. I don't care if it's a Democrat or a Republican, an independent, or what the organization is. If they're a Democratic ally or if they're the Koch brothers or some kind of other Republican organization, if they're skirting campaign laws and using loopholes, then I'm going to speak truth to power.
Can I respond?
You have 1 minute.
Okay. So, yes, that is all very important, and I agree, and I think Jared and I are absolutely in agreement of money needs to come out of politics. We need to have more disclosure in the way money is spent, and I support campaign finance reform, and I support a system that exists here in Maine on the federal level, that is a federally funded system. However, Jared has had the opportunity on seven different times to vote for more transparency, to limit the amount of money that PACs can spend, limit the amount of money that lobbyists can receive, and he's voted against those things, the very issues that he's claiming that are important to him now. So I find some challenge with that, and I think a record is incredibly important, and I think that should be brought to people's attention.
Thank you. I'm happy to address that. I served on the committee that handles campaign finance reform, and as such, I've become very familiar with the law, both state and federal. All the bills that the St. Clair campaign has pointed out that I have ended up not supporting in committee was for a very simple reason. I think it drives home the point, which is that Citizens United ties the hands of state lawmakers. I voted against those because they were unconstitutional. We would have been sued, we would have lost in court. When it came to increasing transparency and accountability, or when our hands weren't tied by the federal law, I've supported it. There are many bills that I have voted for that increase transparency. Hard to get money out of politics with Citizens United, but at the end of the day, because of the work I've done, the legislature, the organization, and Citizens United has endorsed my campaign.
Can I add one
Yes.
thing? Well, the interesting thing about this is that, we can blame Citizens United, we can blame all these things, but it comes down to the fact that we all need to run really clean campaigns. And what's happened with this is that we have people on both sides who may or may not have an impact on the outside groups, kind of hamstringed in the center. And the voters of the 2nd District, they just didn't fall off the turnip truck. I mean, this is something that they look at this, it does not pass the straight face test, and people are thinking, well, what about credibility? Do I really, how do I feel about having that person representing me in Congress if we can't be honest about what's been happening with outside money coming in? And I think that what's doing is really it's taking more and more attention away from the issues that facing Maine's 2nd Congressional District.
Speaking of the issues.
Let's go back to those issues. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the next question is about student loan debt, something a lot of people in Maine are familiar with, because according to the Institute for College Access and Success, Mainers have some of the highest college debt in the nation. I believe we're second. The nonprofit says 68% of graduates have student loans that average almost $31,000 each. Mr. Olson, we'll start with you. If elected, what do you plan to do to help cut down on the burdensome costs associated with a college education?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is look at these for-profit colleges that I feel really are preying on people who really want to make the most out of their lives and may not have other options. I also would like to see an increase in Pell Grant funding. You know, there are 11 community colleges in Maine, 7 community colleges, 11 locations in Maine. Many of those students, which I didn't realize until I met with the college president, there's food insecurity at that community college level. And so they try to supplement their funding with additional Pell Grant funding that goes a couple of $1,000s beyond their regular tuition to help them with gas in their car, food on the table, because oftentimes these folks are coming from they're first-time college students, and they don't have the means that some of the other folks out there who are going to college have, and they need that extra help. I also think that we need to seriously look at allowing people to declare bankruptcy with student loans, because you can lose your house, you can lose your car, but that student loan is with you forever. And yes, you have a bad credit rating, but you could build that back up. But not being able to have people get out from under these $30,000, $40,000, $70,000 loans it's unconscionable.
If I could follow up, if letting somebody declare bankruptcy and eliminating student loans, does that create a situation where somebody can go to law school, go to med school, and then throw up their hands and say?
I can have another minute for your follow-up.
Okay. I think that it might, but I think there have to be, be protocols in place and regulations that would have to address that. But that is a valid point. I don't think that would happen very, very often. I think oftentimes it's folks who have gone to school, have gotten the grants, have gotten their funding, but then realize that they're 3 years into their degree and they have to finish, and yet the bottom is possibly falling out of the market that they're trained for, and it's very difficult. And I think sometimes that starting in a community college and then going to a 4-year college is sometimes the best fit for some people, and it really needs to be tailored to that individual student. It is possible with the bankruptcy being abused, but I don't think you'll see it very often.
Mr. Sinclair.
So I agree with Craig on many of those issues. I think that we, as children go through high school, we should be able to offer alternatives to college right away and put an emphasis on technical colleges. The UTC in Bangor is a great example of where we're training high school and post-high school age kids to be prepared for the workforce, teaching them small refrigeration repair, HVAC services, plumbing services, electricians, culinary arts, all those things that are really preparing people for a job right when they graduate and getting the certification that they need. The privatization of college loans in our country has created a huge interest rate for many college students, so I think we should eliminate that so they're paying a reasonable interest rate. And I think we should allow for college, community college, and have that less expensive.
A really disturbing figure I saw the other day was that students with the highest test scores from low-income families were less likely to complete a college education than students from high-income families with lower test scores. So really, this gets to the student debt problem. If you can't pay, then you can't get the degree, and that really hurts. Again, getting back to the middle class, the ladder's being pulled up. But I think we could cap interest rates, keep those as low as possible, make sure they're the very best, very lowest interest rates possible. Come up with a system of repayment for people so that they're paying according to the salary that they're making when they leave college. I think you shouldn't be paying more than a certain percentage, similar to the way we all know that you shouldn't take on a mortgage that's greater than a certain percentage of your monthly payments. I served in the Marines and I got my college paid for, so I also like the idea of a universal 2-year service option. In return, we could then pay for people's college education. You give us 2 years to the country and volunteer and serve in many different ways, and in return we could help get a handle on this by paying for 2 years of college.
We are going to move on. We're going to ask, John, could you ask our next question? And it is about working across the aisle, and we're going to start with Lucas.
Yeah, many candidates, including some of you, talk about the importance of working across the aisle. Can you tell us whom you have worked with, who is your best ally, and what issue have you worked on together?
So I've worked with lots of independents, Republicans, and Democrats alike. As I worked on Katahdin Woods and Waters in the Katahdin region on the National Monument, it was not a bipartisan issue. It was a bipartisan issue. We had to bring many different opposing people to the table, and I think we need to do this in Congress as well. We need to create a space where people can come and have honest conversations with one another, where we can build trust, where we can build relationships, and then we can make the hard decisions and get the big ideas done. And that's exactly what happened in the Katahdin region, where it was a big, very controversial idea, but through conversation and through trust and respect, we were actually able to achieve it. And I think we need to have a lot more of that in Congress, a lot more civility and a lot more working together, but it's certainly something that can happen.
Working in the Maine State Legislature, Senator Tom Saviello comes to mind. He's actually someone that's supporting my candidacy now. He's a Republican senator. We worked together on Buy American, Buy Maine legislation. Worked together on it in the committee. Did the very best we could. At the end of the day, we couldn't get it passed, but that was a bipartisan effort. I also think of Representative Brad Farron, now running for state senate. Both veterans. We've worked together on some significant reforms to help our veterans in the state of Maine. And again, always a bipartisan effort. We actually submitted the same piece of legislation in 2017, and in the spirit of compromise, I let him be the sponsor of the bill as a Republican, knowing that would probably help advance the legislation through a Republican-controlled Senate, and ultimately we got that passed into law to help combat medics return home and get a job.
Thank you. In a former life when I used to run a city department in Iowa, I had the opportunity to work both with Senator Chuck Grassley as well as Senator John McCain on different issues relating to airline slots in airports and agricultural items and things like that with Senator Grassley. And, but that was in a former life. I live in a small town now, and I've served on our Board of Selectmen with people of all political backgrounds. And living in a small community, you learn to get things done, and you get things done regardless of politics. Politics really don't enter into the basic services that you want to have in your community and provide. And one of my favorite stories is I have a good friend who was a longtime garage owner on the island and a fuel oil delivery man, and has now retired. And in his front yard, he has his American flag up there on the top of the flagpole. Under that is his Trump flag. And then on his bumper is my bumper sticker. And so Bob Leach is out there. We don't agree politically on a lot of things, but we do agree when things need to be done in our community, and we've worked together on many, many items.
Candidates panel, we are going to take a short break. After the break, we're going to dive into a topic a lot of our viewers have been asking us about, many people asking what we are going to do about the nation's crippling opioid epidemic. It is a problem that is hitting hard right here at home, as we all unfortunately know. Plus, we're going to talk about health care and other big issues that you candidates would face if you were to be elected. Stay tuned. We are back in just a few minutes. Oh, goodness.
You're watching a special Commitment 2018 presentation, the Democratic primary debate for Congressional District 2. Broadcasting live across the state of Maine, here's host Megan Torgeson.
Welcome back to our live statewide debate with the Democratic candidates seeking to challenge incumbent Congressman Bruce Poliquin for Maine's 2nd congressional seat. I want to welcome back those of you watching at home on TV, as well as possibly on any of our social platforms. I'm Megan Torgeson, and we are going to turn the questioning over to the panel right now. We're going to go to WMTW News 8 political reporter Paul Merrill. Paul, I believe we're starting off with a question about the opioid epidemic.
Yes, thank you, Megan. Certainly, I don't have to tell anybody here the effect that the opioid crisis has had on Maine, is having on Maine, pretty much affects everybody in our state. And we have these discussions about how to fix the problem. We hear about 3 things. We hear about law enforcement, prevention, and treatment options. So we want to ask you what you would do to try to fight the crisis, but we want you to put a little bit of a finer point on it. Of those 3 things, law enforcement, prevention, treatment, which one is the most important to focus on if you are elected to Congress? We're going to start with Jared Golden.
Thank you. I think they're all important pieces of it. So certainly I think we should give law enforcement all of the staffing and resources that they need to protect us, but I think we should do that no matter what the problem is, not necessarily specific to opiates, but making sure that they have the resources to protect our communities. Probably the most important thing is expanding healthcare coverage. We know from the experts here in Maine that one of the top things that they were calling for to address the opiate crisis and the rising toll was to expand Medicaid. We've just done that. We need to make sure that people have access to health care so that they can access the treatment, which is so important. And then after that, I think prevention and education, and try and keep people from starting to go down the road of substance abuse, and making sure that they get the care that they need, behavioral health care and other things. So I would put the emphasis on treatment and access to health care.
We really have to start with treatment. I mean, we have to deal with the issue as it stands right now, and that treatment is not only getting out there and helping people, but also decriminalizing opioids in such a sense that it is an addiction, and not arresting people and putting them in jail where it's going to get even worse. So again, and expanding Medicaid is a key figure in that overall push. And we also have to think about homelessness and homeless issues. A lot of opiate addicts become homeless, or they have become homeless. Opioid addiction begins. We have to have safe and stable places for them not only to live and to go through the recovery process. And the recovery process can take months. I recently went to a funeral within the last few months of a friend whose son died of an opioid overdose because he had been clean for about 3 months, but then had a relapse, and that relapse was at such a large level that he died. And so it's something that we have to do. We have to work on prevention and then roll back from there.
Mr. Sinclair.
Yeah, I agree with the answers that were said. But all 3 are very important. All 3 things that you mentioned. Prevention obviously is incredibly important. We need to keep people from getting hooked on opiates from the very beginning, and that includes how we prescribe them and how we store them. We need to make sure that when law enforcement, from a treatment standpoint, that law enforcement and the general public can destigmatize what addiction is, and making sure that we treat it like an illness. And the intersection from people that are addicted and recovery is law enforcement. And so law enforcement needs to be given the tools in order to help people through the recovery process. I, on Saturday, spent a day with Waldo County Reentry Center, and they're training people, helping people, and mentoring them to become active members of society after they have been arrested.
Is there one of the 3 that you think is the most important?
I think they're all incredibly important. Yeah, I think it's a 3-sided issue, and all are important.
A follow-up, one of the things that was debated last night is the use or the implementation of safe injection sites. It is something that is obviously very divisive and polarizing. I'd like to know where each of you as candidates stand on safe injection sites and why or why not. Mr. Olson, we can start with you.
I think they are a good alternative. I know they're doing it in Boston. It's working well. Any way you can save a life, it has to happen. We can't throw people away. Any way you can save a life, and if that means a clean injection space with qualified medical personnel around, I am completely in agreement with that.
Yeah, I agree. We also need to be able to provide places for people to get clean needles and a needle exchange, to get the health care that they need. All of those things are incredibly important. Again, this is the opportunity when people are using, is to interact with them. and begin to provide alternatives and to help through the recovery process. If there is not an effort at that point of contact to help people, we're going to continue the cycle of addiction, and we're not going to help people break free.
You know, things like safe needle exchange programs, Narcan, naloxone, things to save lives. I'm 100% on board with that. And again, I put the emphasis on treatment. But this was a bill that actually came to the legislature, I think in 2017, and I actually did not support it. For me, I don't think that we should go down the road of having legal injection sites for things like opiates. I think that we need to focus on preventing it, getting people treatment, and getting them off of the substance abuse problems that they have. And I don't think that America should go down that path of having full-on legal use of very harmful substances like opiates.
And on the topic of healthcare, one more follow-up. This is pretty much yes or no. The question comes from a voter, John Mosey, who lives in Old Orchard Beach. Take a listen.
Do you favor universal health care?
Simply put, Mr. St. Clair.
Yeah, and a simple answer, I do. I am completely supportive of universal health care.
I like the Medicare for All approach.
Absolutely.
Okay, Isaac, we can move on.
All right. Our next question comes from Rosalind Fisher of Bangor. Let's take a listen.
I would like to ask all those who are candidates for the 2nd District how they tend to specifically protect Medicare and Social Security. I'm 80 years old.
I think, Mr. Sinclair, do we start with you?
Sure. So it's absolutely critical that we protect Medicare and Social Security in our state and our country, and so many people depend on it. What I think we need to do is make sure that we're not giving tax breaks like Bruce Poliquin and Paul Ryan have done for the very wealthiest in our country and the largest corporations in our country, and use the need to pay off those tax breaks by gutting these bedrock programs that allow people to respectfully retire and live in a way that honors the work that they did. And there's changes that we can make to Social Security to make sure that the government pension offset is covered, and teachers that have worked their whole lives don't get left out of the Social Security program. But these are incredibly important programs. This is what the federal government does so well, and we need to protect them at all costs.
Ma'am, I want to do more than protect your Social Security. I think that rising costs have outpaced the benefit itself, and people are living on very fixed incomes. So what we need to do is lift the cap on Social Security for individuals earning more than $128,000 a year. I think that they should continue to pay in on every dollar they earn. Put that into the Social Security fund and make sure that not only do we protect it, but that we can expand that benefit for people like yourself. You've earned it. In terms of Medicare, again, let's take the tax cuts back from the billionaires and the millionaires, from multinational corporations that are outsourcing our jobs. Let's bring that revenue home and make sure that everyone has access to health care in this country. But above all, we're not privatizing Medicare.
First of all, what we really need to do is to call people out on that, on using the word entitlement when we talk about Medicare and Social Security. This is something people have paid into. This is something that they deserve. This is their right. And to simply toss it aside and use it to balance a budget is irresponsible. I fully agree with increasing actually taking away the cap of $128,000 per year. Let everyone pay a percentage of their income in to help those who need help and who have paid into the system, and actually not have to go through these rigmarole of actually trying to gut this system and then trying to sell it as an entitlement when it isn't. And people need to retire in dignity, and to know that they have that resource available to them, and that they're not going to have to worry as they get into their older years.
John, I believe you have the next question.
Yes, certainly too many school shootings in our nation. Everyone would agree on that, but there's great disagreement on how to prevent them. Do you think the existence of gun-free zones at schools makes them easier targets?
I don't think it makes them easier targets. I think that the issue is that we are not doing the proper background checks that we should be doing. We're not enacting red flag laws as they should be enacted. We're allowing people to arm themselves with semi-automatic weapons. Not all semi-automatic weapons should be banned, but certainly it's those that are assault-style weapons that can be adapted to become rapid-fire firearms. And also selling these high-capacity magazines that really have no use for hunting. High-capacity magazines are for one thing, and they're for the military. They should not be for private use. And I also think that if we're looking at things like the Second Amendment, what we've seen from the Republican side oftentimes is give people more guns and we'll be safer. And if that certainly is the case, why do we restrict guns in congressional office buildings and in the U.S. Capitol? If people should have guns wherever, let's allow it in those areas as well.
So I agree with Craig, and Craig and I have both been endorsed by Moms Demand Action for this reason. And I am a sportsman. I grew up with guns. I grew up hunting. I own guns, and I look forward to teaching my children how to shoot safely and how to hunt. But I also watch them walk down the driveway and get on the school bus every day, and I want to make sure they're safe when they're in school. And when you hunt in Maine, you have to take a hunter safety course. You have to pass a test, you have to get a license, and you're restricted to the amount of ammunition you're allowed in your gun at any one given time. If you're duck hunting, for example, you can have no more than 3 shells in your shotgun. I mean, do we really honor the lives of ducks over the lives of children in this country? It doesn't make any sense to me. And so we need to stay focused on making sure that an 18-year-old can't go to Walmart and buy a AR-15 style rifle with unlimited ammunition and a large capacity magazine without any training and without any oversight. We have the ability to put safe gun laws into effect, including background checks, large capacity magazines. We have the ability to do that in our country, and we need to make sure that our children, including mine, are safe every day.
No, I don't think that having schools be gun-free makes them a softer target. I think that our schools are for learning, and we don't want to have, I think, more guns at schools. We want to make sure that there aren't no guns at schools. I've supported things just in this last legislature, a bond to help schools make investments in making security investments, whether that be locks on their doors, bulletproof windows, and many other things. But I don't think that the solution should be allowing teachers to carry guns. I don't think most teachers want to see more guns in schools. Some schools and communities decide to have resource officers and others there to protect students in the community. But at the end of the day, I don't think the solution should be more guns on school campuses.
Do you have a follow-up, Ken?
Yeah, follow-up question. This is a yes or no question for the candidates. The National Rifle Association represents the interests of many law-abiding Mainers, but certainly the organization has been a target for many liberals. Will you accept support from the NRA, including campaign donations?
So let's restart. Yes, we'll start with you, Representative Golden, and then we'll move down.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to accept any financial support from the NRA. At the end of the day, I think what's most damaging about the NRA is the heightened rhetoric that they use to talk about this issue. It's very divisive. I think that they try and label Democrats as a party that is out to take away everyone's firearms, and that's just not the truth. It just doesn't allow much space for compromise and reasoned discussions about how to find solutions to end gun violence. That's probably what's worst about the NRA at this point in time, in my opinion.
Absolutely not. I would never accept funds from the NRA.
Neither would I, and I think what's most important is creating a space for people to have honest dialogue about it. If we continue to stay at the polls and lob insults at each other and rhetoric at each other, that's not furthering the conversation. And I think the NRA plays a role in that creates the divisiveness. I know that these can be challenging conversations, but they absolutely have to be had.
So, if elected, sort of the elephant in the room in Washington is the Trump White House, and right now it's under scrutiny for contacts the Trump campaign had with Russia during the 2016 election. The president denies any collusion. Several former campaign staffers and his campaign manager have been indicted. Other people have pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. If elected, what do you see as your role in determining what level Russia played in meddling with the U.S. election?
Craig.
Well, I really think, number one, we need to allow Mr. Mueller to continue his investigation and do the due diligence that he is charged with. I think that we need to increase our monitoring of internet traffic and internet influx into the U.S. and also what's going out. I think we need to be looking at what's going into Russia, routed through the U.S. So I think that we have to do that, and then if we find things, we have to bring sanctions. We have to have teeth in doing this and in having some response rather than just saying, well, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. We'll find out in the next election. I mean, we cannot let these things sit and simmer. We have to be on top of it. Sanctions have to be a part of it. This is a diplomatic issue, and it's also meddling in U.S. elections, which is unconscionable.
I agree with Craig. We do need to allow Mr. Mueller to continue his investigation, and we should respond to what the findings are. And it's very hard to tell what they are. You know, he obviously has a lot more information at his disposal than I do sitting here, or any of us in this room do. And I think that process is going to play itself out, and we'll be able to see what happens. I think the Congress and the House needs to allow the judiciary committees to focus on what's actually happening to our elections and who's meddling. Homeland Security needs to play an oversized role in making sure that we're not being taken advantage of in any way. And but you know, we need to not try to obstruct any of these processes, but we need to let them carry out and make sure that we're taking care of our election process, which is a very important thing in our country.
Yeah, I think the job of any congressman or woman at this point in time is to protect the integrity of the investigation. No political games here. It doesn't. Neither party should be interfering at all. Certainly, I think our leaders need to continue to encourage the White House to also not lean in and try and interfere in any way whatsoever. The investigation will come to a conclusion at some point here, and certainly if laws have been broken by any leader in this country, whether they're a Democrat or a Republican or independent or you know, a president or just a rank and file member of Congress, they need to be held accountable, but you can't jump to conclusions.
A little closer to home now, we're going to transition. We're going to move to Isaac. He has a question about broadband.
Yes, and this actually comes from Adam Casey via Twitter. He asks, how are we going to bring better services to rural areas, mainly with broadband internet? Many people pay high amounts for subpar service from DSL or satellite providers.
So I think that broadband needs to be treated as a public utility, and we need to invest in it as such. I think about when LBJ first ran for Congress, he ran on a platform of illuminating hill country in Texas, that he was going to bring the electric grid to every rural corner of America, and did just that, and it had tremendous transformative effects on rural America. We need to do the same thing now in broadband, make the federal investments, treat it as a utility. And when you think about the transformative impact that it would have on places like Dover-Foxcroft and Cambridge and East Millinocket and Madawaska, it would bring a lot of these towns into, give them the ability to compete in a 21st century marketplace. So it's absolutely important to make sure that we are competitive in the future economy.
This is something we've been talking about in Maine for an awful long time. The entire 4 years I've been in the legislature, we've been talking about getting broadband out in rural Maine, and always people point and say, well, let's wait and let the marketplace take care of it, let the private sector do it. I think it's very clear at this point that's not going to happen, likely because it is not maybe going to maximize their profits, and when something like that is the case, that's when I think government investment is necessary and appropriate. And so I put this in the bucket of infrastructure as we have these discussions about rebuilding our country and making an investment in our infrastructure. I think that can include broadband, treating it more like a utility and something that government has to bring to rural communities all over America.
Yeah, broadband, it's an infrastructure issue, just like roads and bridges and improving our rail lines. We're fortunate in my community in Islesboro that we have a high tax base, and we're in the final stages right now of lighting up a broadband system that is our own utility as a municipality. It's a $3.8 million project. We were able to bond it locally because we have a high tax base. But other communities, every community is different, and we can't just have a cookie cutter approach that says this is the way that the entire state of Maine is going to be. We have to look at each community. We did vetting. I was on the Board of Selectmen when we did the initial funding to go out and do the studies, so we would have data to move forward with different providers. When we found no providers really wanted to serve our rural community, we decided to do it on our own. And we now have broadband service, 1 gigabit service, into your home with your phone, unlimited calling, unlimited internet, and it's $52 a month. Now that's not going to work in every community. Other communities are going to have to look at other funding sources, and I think that with the federal government has to be a player at the table. This is like electrical grid infrastructure in the 1930s, and it was like the interstate highway system of the 1950s. We're not going to move forward as a nation, we're not going to move forward as a state if we don't have access to high broadband. And it brings not only jobs to a community, it brings in new people. We have a young family that just bought a house. He's a software engineer because he knew he would have the speed that he needed for his community.
Mr. Olson, I know it still says green, but we do have a second timer, so time, it has been called time. I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're going to move on. John, you have a question about bipartisanship for the candidates?
Yes, we're less than a week away from the primary. Obviously, all three of you are running for a chance to take on Congressman Bruce Poliquin in November. In the spirit of bipartisanship here tonight, can you tell us a policy of Congressman Poliquin's that you support?
We'll start with you, Representative Golden.
Well, I think something that we clearly have in common is a desire to help veterans. That's something I've been very successful doing in the Maine State Legislature. I know that he chose to be on that committee, and he's trying his best to do some things to help veterans as well.
For me, I actually am in full support of his co-sponsorship of the legislation that is allowing sexual harassment issues to be taken up in the House in a free and open manner and not kind of shunted off to the side. I know he's been on the forefront with that and co-sponsoring that bill, and I think that was a really good thing for him to do.
I agree with Craig. I think that we need to make sure that we are focusing on sexual harassment in the workplace, and the work that he did there is an important bit of work. I also like what he's done on making sure that military uniforms are required to be made in the United States, and supporting New Balance in that effort was a really important thing.
Paul, you have the next question.
Next question. It's tough to admit you're wrong. Tell us about a time that you were wrong about a position, changed your mind on a policy, and what happened to sway you.
Mr. Olson, you can start.
Oh, thank you.
You get to start this one.
I've been wrong lots of times. Just ask my wife. No, there are a number of issues. When we first started a process on our island with building an elderly care facility, I was really not quite sure that it was something for the infrastructure of the island that we could handle. And it was something that was going to take a lot of means, and there were needs that our school needed, and there were needs that we needed within our town. And but after that got underway, and after people began to work on that project, and I could see the benefit, I thought it was fabulous. And you know, we had a 6-bed facility. Now we have an 8-bed facility, and I was part of the team that helped raise some of that money. So that was something where I completely did a 180.
So I think that the work that I did on to help create Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument wasn't necessarily a right or wrong issue, but going into these types of big ideas that are very challenging, and recognizing that we don't have all the answers, and that it's going to take a lot of conversations with a lot of opposing viewpoints to come up with the right answer. And I think what's more important than going into any situation and saying, this is right, this is wrong, is going in and saying, let's collectively come up with the best idea for as many people as we can. And that ultimately we were able to make a lot of compromise. And in the National Monument, we're allowed to have we created the first national monument in the country that allowed hunting in places and snowmobiling in places. That came out of compromise and keeping an open mind, which I think is really important.
I think we're all wrong sometimes, and in the legislature you certainly learn a lot of important lessons. You always got to keep your mind open and continue to listen and learn. representing Lewiston, we've been fighting to get passenger rail to our community for a long time now. And in my first term, there was actually another bill coming out of Bangor trying to accomplish the same thing. And actually sitting on the Transportation Committee, I was able to move forward with legislation to help Lewiston. Voted against doing the same for Bangor, thinking, well, the train has to go to Lewiston first and then on to Bangor. But by the time that came to the House floor, having listened to a lot of people, I realized it's not a zero-sum game. What's good for Lewiston is also good for Bangor, and we're all in this together. So ultimately turned around and helped the Bangor delegation flip that legislation from a negative committee report to a positive, successful passage on the House floor.
John, you're going to ask a question about ranked choice voting.
Yes, this is a yes or no question. Will you accept the results of the primary election with the new ranked choice voting system in Maine?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yes, without a doubt.
And at the risk of maybe, it's been pretty civil so far tonight, maybe stirring things up a little bit, who would be your second choice?
I'm going to vote for both of them.
There we go. I'm not going to know until I walk into that booth.
Yeah, it's a tough question, and I think what's most important is that Craig and Jared would be far better than the congressman that we have now, and I think we all can agree on that.
I think we all agree that we hope voters will support ranked choice voting on June 12th as well.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's important.
You all have talked a lot about areas where you agree. There's been a very little disagreement. I wonder if you guys, in the last couple minutes of this program, can tell voters what defines you in terms of differences with the other candidates. Let's start with you, Craig.
What I really bring to the table is that life experience of living a middle-class life in Maine, attempting to live a middle-class life in Maine, and struggling with a lot of issues as a small business, but also with health insurance and with raising a family and wanting that family to be successful, wanting them to get a good education, not knowing maybe at the outset how you're going to pay for that education, but trying to figure it out, but also making Maine a place where your children want to come back. We're losing people every day out of Maine. We have a negative population growth. We need our young people coming back. We need to be attracting new young people and new immigrants from other countries, from other states. It just makes Maine a tighter and more vibrant place if we can build that population. And for me coming in, I've got a couple of years on these guys, so I've got a little bit more on the ground experience at this point, but they are great candidates. They are great men who I've actually become friends with in the past 9 months that we've been doing this.
Well, that's a nice place to wrap. We have about 2 minutes left in show. I want to make sure that the two of you get 1 minute 30 seconds actually left, so take it away.
So I think the difference between the three of us is really our life experience, and we all bring different experiences to the table. I think what gives me an advantage in this is the time that I've spent on Capitol Hill. I've spent years working on Capitol Hill, in the House, pushing for legislation, understanding where levers are and how to make sure that we can bring back federal dollars and federal investment to make people's lives better here in Maine, and that's really what I'm going to be focused on.
Representative
I think it's leadership experience in the Marines, in combat overseas. It's leadership experience in the Maine State Legislature, 4 years of service there, 2 years working down in Congress as well in the Senate Homeland Security Committee. I think if there's anything, issues-wise that really sets me apart, it's that I consider myself a strong labor Democrat. I have a lot of labor endorsements, and go look at the endorsement page, and I think you're going to see a broad base of union support, and that's because I put the priority on expanding unions and collective bargaining in this country, because I think that the working middle class people are falling behind in this country, and a strong union labor movement is what we need to fix it.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to candidates. Thank you to our audience and everybody watching at home. We also want to thank you, Maine Augusta, for hosting us this evening, and we want to thank everybody for watching. Have a great night. I'm Megan Torgeson.